What is up, everyone? Welcome back to our podcast. My name is Chris.
And my name is James.
And we are the Formula One Bros.
Just two twins with a love of F1 to share our thoughts on everything in the world of Formula One.
And it has been a busy week in the news cycle for Formula One. We are in an off weekend between Japan and Shanghai, the first Shanghai race that we've had since 2019, which we will preview in an upcoming episode before the Chinese Grand Prix.
Which I have to tell you, I'm so excited to go back to the Chinese Grand Prix. It's such a good racetrack. It's produced some pretty good racing. And it's nice when a track that's gone away for a while comes back. There's a lot of nostalgia. And like back in 2019, the last Formula One race that was held in Shanghai, Sebastian Vettel had not retired. Fernando Alonso had retired.
Yes.
Lewis Hamilton was only a 5-time world champion. Lando and Carlos were both at McLaren. The Haas drivers were Kevin Magnussen and Roman Grosjean.
And before we go any further, we're going to talk about all of those driver changes and everything that has happened since 2019 on our preview episode coming up this week. But lots of news in the news cycle this week for F1. It's been exciting. The first being the bombshell announcement that Fernando Alonso, who many thought had a shot at a Red Bull seat or a Mercedes seat, is staying long-term through the end of 2026 at Aston Martin.
Yeah. So I also definitely was not expecting that. I was totally gonna, for Fernando Alonso, I could have seen him waiting out to see, like, exactly like you said, what Mercedes and Red Bull were going to do. I thought that he was a pretty clear shoe-in for that. But I think what this tells me, Fernando signing long-term with Aston Martin, is that there's some really, really good things coming in the future for Aston Martin. And I think he really believes in the team and where they're at. He believes in Lawrence Stroll, the leadership of the team, and where the direction that it's going. So I think if you're working at Aston Martin, I think this is really, really good that you've seen that Fernando Alonso is signing long-term, because Fernando is not just going to sign with any old team if he doesn't feel like it's going to be worth his time, because he is getting to retirement age. And, I'm sure he wants his last couple of years in Formula One to be, worth it. So I think it's good for Aston Martin. I think they have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, it's good. And I think I agree with your kind of line of thinking there that, I think Fernando Alonso is definitely seeing something that he likes if he's willing to stay on. And I think there's also a couple of other things. I think, we're really starting to get further and further into what the 2026 cars are going to look like. There have been a couple tweets that I've seen that have been a lot about like the design philosophy of the car, and there's a lot of development going on through that.
They're going to be a lot smaller, aren't they?
They're going to be smaller. They're going to be lighter. It's changing the aero philosophy a little bit, focusing more on in-wash than out-wash. So I think there's something that Aston Martin is doing that he clearly likes. The other thing too is that Honda is coming back on for Aston Martin in 2026. I think that is something that's kind of gotten lost in some of the news cycles, is that Aston Martin is moving to Honda power units in 2026, because it will not be supplying Red Bull from 2026 on, because it will be the Ford Red Bull powertrain thing for them. So Honda's moving over to Aston Martin, which means Mercedes is losing a customer. And Fernando Alonso was a huge part as to why McLaren picked up Honda in 2016 after the 2015, in 2015 after the 2014 last year of the McLaren Mercedes partnership in 2014. So yeah, I mean, Fernando Alonso has always had a close relationship with Honda. He was the reason why they came over to McLaren in 2015 when they did. And then when Fernando Alonso left, they went to Renault, and after that, it kind of that relationship fizzled out from there. But I imagine that has a huge part of it. And he clearly likes not only what he's seeing with 2026, but also 2025 and the what's already in the pipeline. I imagine that Aston Martin is already starting to put plans in place for their 2025 car because nothing is really going to be unchanged. So in the long term, I think he likes what he sees, but also in the short term, what Aston Martin has in the development pipeline, they're already starting to probably get ready for next season, even though it's, we've only had 4 races. I imagine that they're looking ahead to that. So,
Oh yeah, for sure.
and I think, he knows the team. He knows Lawrence Stroll. He's been there for a couple years, and he's getting older. And I think he is starting to look at, the team in which he wants to retire with, and him signing a long-term deal makes me wonder if there's some sort of ambassador role for him after he does retire. Like if there's something in it for him after he retires to stay on as an ambassador, like we all thought Lewis was going to be with Mercedes.
Yeah, I can definitely picture that happening. I also want to bring up a point. If with Fernando pushing for the Honda partnership at Aston Martin and Aston Martin partnering with Honda now, and we've seen in the past couple years how poor the Mercedes engine has been and how poor the Mercedes power unit has been. And even in Japan, Lance Stroll was like the straight line speed, all our cars like on a different level than everyone else's. It was very shades of GP2 engine going on,
right?
At Mercedes, or sorry, at Aston Martin in Japan. And so I think there may be a little bit lack of faith now with the Mercedes power units. And we saw the last time Honda was in Formula One, how dominant Red Bull was with that power unit. So, I think that's definitely a lot more enticing of a power unit partnership than Mercedes right now.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the success that Honda has had with Red Bull so far. They helped get Red Bull, I think, with also the help with Adrian Newey, but they helped Red Bull get back to championship winning form. And they got a power unit. I will never forget the Red Bull's first win in the Honda era in Austria 2019, after it looked like Charles Leclerc was dominating that race, and Max chased him down and got it going and won that race. And so I think there's a lot of success there, and I think that's going to be great. Now, why don't you kind of sort of kick us off with what the implications are here for the drivers market?
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting, because everyone, for at least for right now, everyone thought Carlos Sainz was going to go to Aston Martin. Like Carlos Sainz was definitely the shoe in to be Aston Martin, or at Red Bull and or Mercedes, and with and Max was looking like that he was potentially going to leave Red Bull. And so with Fernando Alonso signing in long term with Aston Martin, there goes Aston Martin out of the picture as to where drivers could go. So it kind of locks Red Bull up too, because I mean, at least right now that Aston Martin's gone, I think Max is not going to go anywhere. Mercedes is pretty set on, after Lewis, on Kimi Antonelli coming up from F2. I believe he's already gotten the super license point. All he has to do is just turn 18. And he's pretty much going to be the shoe-in to partner George Russell. And so I think for Carlos Sainz, this means with Fernando Alonso staying at Aston Martin, pretty much the only place that I could see Carlos Sainz going would be Sauber. And the reason I think, and you and I both talked about this, is him staying at Sauber would be because several things. One, I mean, that's pretty much the only other place he could go. Two, Sauber is going to eventually be, I can see Chris's cats are fighting in the background, chasing each other. But after this season, they're going to be Sauber. They're being bought by Audi. After 2025, they're going to be bought by Audi. And they've already decided who their team principal is going to be, Andreas Seidel. And Carlos Sainz already has a great working relationship with Andreas Seidel. He's already been a driver for Andreas Seidel when he was at McLaren. And so I can totally see him going to Sauber for a year before that turns over to Audi.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that is going to be his contract and the deal, and what entices him to go there is essentially going to be the long-term driver that's going to lead the project into the future. And I think they are hinging on the success of Carlos Sainz, and I think he's an incredibly reliable driver. Any team would be lucky to have Carlos Sainz with how adaptable he is.
Yeah.
And he is, and currently he is way out driving Charles Leclerc. Like he's looking better than Charles right now in that Ferrari. He looks way more comfortable. He's getting everything out of that car. And so I think he's going to kind of be the linchpin in that project, and it's going to come with a lot of incentives and perks based on how he leads that team into the future. And I think he is going to be an instrumental part of that team's success if he's going there. And I think that's going to be a huge reason to kind of take a backward step on the grid, but it's going to come with being so involved in the progress of that team.
And it's a really, really cool opportunity for him too, because Carlos, throughout his entire Formula One career since 2015, he's never been a number one driver. He's never been the clear-cut number one driver at any team he's raced at. So this is a really cool opportunity for him to finally become the number one driver on a team, and to really lead the team as a driver.
And I will say the reason why I think it's more likely that he'll go to Sauber than he would go to Red Bull, leaving Sergio Perez out of it. I think even if Sergio Perez was not going to be in the team next year and there was an open seat at Red Bull, I'm still wondering if Carlos Sainz would go to, pick Sauber, eventually Audi over Red Bull, is because he would be going as a number 2 to Max Verstappen, and that's all he will ever be doing. And I think he's way better than that. And I think he needs to be in a team where he can be the leader and he can be the number one. It takes all of the pressure off of him, and I think it allows him to focus much more on the team aspect. He's kind of what we call in American sports, particularly like baseball, he's been what we would call a journeyman. He's been going from team to team. He's never been there for more than 2 or 3 years. And I think that what that has done is it's made him incredibly adaptable. But I think also being a number one driver, there's, I think, a little bit of potential and a little bit of consistency and just kind of that superstar status that I think there's still a little bit left there to unlock for Carlos. Is he on superstar status with someone like Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton or Charles Leclerc? I don't think so.
No, not yet.
And I don't think he ever will be, because he's older than all those guys except for Lewis. But I think there's still a little bit left in the tank for him to unlock, and I think that's going to come with being the trusted number one team leader, because he's never really had that. He had that a little bit at McLaren, but as soon as Lando Norris got to grips with the McLaren car his rookie season, and after his rookie season in 2020, Lando was great, and he was the podium getter in 2020. So he's never been the clear-cut number one, and I think that will give him a little bit of an edge. And I think that's why even if there was an open spot at Red Bull, I think he'd be more enticed to take that. But that's also to say that if there even was an open spot at Red Bull, because I don't think there is right now, the way that Sergio Perez is performing.
Yeah, he's had an awesome start to the season. It very much reminds me of 2021 when he first joined Red Bull, how great he was, and his Sergio Perez's performance this year has been very much the Sergio Perez that we have come to know and love. And the other thing with Carlos going to Sauber, if he were to go to Sauber, now who's going to partner him? Because right now they've got 2 drivers, Valtteri Bottas and Guan Yu Zhou. I think, and I had this theory, I could totally see them sticking with Valtteri Bottas to partner Carlos Sainz, and I could see Guan Yu Zhou replacing one of the Haas drivers, either Kevin Magnussen or Nico Hülkenberg.
I actually see one of them going to Williams. And the reason why I say Williams is because I think Ferrari and Haas are going to want Ollie Behrman in the hat
Oh,
in that
that's
car.
true. That's
You know,
true.
I think the way that Ollie Behrman performed in Jeddah in the Ferrari, he acquitted himself incredibly well. I
Yeah,
think
and
they're going to want Ollie Behrman in a Haas.
that is
So
true.
I think Zhou Guanyu is going to stay on the grid because the Chinese market is incredible and is going to bring a lot of benefit to any team that picks him up. But I think it's going to be Williams over Haas.
Yeah, that is true. I didn't think about Williams, and also because Logan Sargent's not performing very well so far at this beginning part of the year. So I could totally see them signing Guan Yu Zhou, and that opens up spot for Carlos to comfortably head to Sauber.
Yeah, I agree. I did want to talk a little bit about Red Bull really quick and a little bit more on Sergio Perez because I did have a couple thoughts. I think here's the thing why, like, because Sergio Perez for a couple races, the gap between himself and Max Verstappen has still been pretty large, but it's been second place, and I think what that tells me is that I think the Red Bull is just that good, and I think he's that comfortable in it early on this season. But I also will say his qualifying form has been a lot better this year than it was last year.
Oh, totally.
I remember Alex Albon saying in an interview that the gap between Alex and Max, and then Checo and Max, was not much different. But when Alex was at Red Bull, they were working, they were qualifying, third, fourth, fifth. Now they're qualifying first and second. And if you qualify, the same gap, but you're qualifying fifth instead of second, but it's the same gap between the drivers, by the time you get up to anywhere where you're fighting for a podium, you're already a pit stop cycle behind because you have to pass all those extra drivers. But with Sergio Perez, his qualifying being a lot better this year, he's starting right away from second or third, and he's gotten a couple really good starts at the beginning of the season. So he's putting himself in second place pretty much in the opening phases of each race that he's been in. And so has the gap come down between last year and the end of last year and this year? I don't think by much, but it doesn't really need to, because Red Bull is so far and away the favorite that it doesn't really matter, because even if he's 10 seconds off the lead, 20 seconds off the lead, he's still probably in second place.
Yeah, which that's not a great place for every other team to be in. Great place for Red Bull to be in,
right?
Not a great place for every other team to be in.
That's a scathing indictment of where everybody else is, and a huge indicator of just how much progress Red Bull has made. But that's all they need for Sergio Perez to do. I think the only time they're really going to need him to get closer is if the grid starts to catch up. And honestly, I don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah, that is very true. I honestly don't see the rest of the field catching up, and we'll see how the new engine, the new power unit regulations go, but I don't even see the rest of the field catching up by the end of 2025.
No.
Speaking of 2025, we got this schedule announcement.
The other big news from the week was that the 2025 schedule was announced, and
there are a lot of things on this calendar that are very similar to last year, that have been very similar to the past couple seasons, but also some different things, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that we all noticed is the first race of the season is going back to Australia. No longer Bahrain, the first race of the season. It is Australia. I'm very curious to see why they did that. I think because, one, Australia has just been the season opener for like ever. But also, I wonder if that has something to do with because the conflict that they ran into this year with Bahrain and Saudi Arabia was Ramadan, with that being in the Middle East and a majority, those countries being Islamic countries, and Ramadan being during that time. I think they pushed it back for Ramadan, which I think if that's the reason that they did. I think that's awesome.
I am like 99% sure that's exactly what they did. And so they moved, and I'm pretty sure looking at where this falls, yeah, Bahrain is on the 11th through the 13th that
So it would have
weekend,
been like this weekend next year.
and then Saudi Arabia is the second to last weekend in April. So that puts it completely outside of Ramadan. Those races fall after Eid. So I think that schedule was designed very intentionally so that they, so that it could avoid that holy holiday, which I think is
that's why
great.
they had done that in the past too. Like
Yeah.
Bahrain, like when Bahrain first came on the calendar in like 2004,
Yeah.
I think it
It was
was,
the third race of the season.
yeah, it was usually the third race of the season because of
Yeah.
Ramadan.
And back then the season didn't start until end of March, beginning of April anyway. So there was no conflict anyway. But yeah, so starting off in Australia, the 14th through the 16th of March, and then the very next weekend they go to China. And then they have a weekend off, and then they go to Japan. So the first three races, Australia, China, and Japan, pretty much all staying in the same time zone, which is really good. I know Formula One is making a much more conscious effort to do regional scheduling,
which is so smart for them to do.
Which is great. Yeah, they do.
Easier on the and with having a 24 race season, doing it regionally like this makes travel easier. It wears out the teams, the drivers, all the personnel. It wears them out less. It's a lot better to do.
You have three races immediately in the Far East, and then you have two races in the Middle East. There's still the outlier of USA being
Get rid of Miami.
That the Miami race being that first weekend in May, and then going back to Italy to start the first leg of the the European season. And then you have another jump around to Canada. And again, I think the reason why those scheduling things happen is just because US and Canada are very particular about where they schedule those things. And I think, again, particularly with Miami, the reason why they schedule it so early is because you go any later, it's going to be hotter. And then in the fall is like September, and like August, September, October, that's hurricane season.
That's hurricane season. Yeah. So they can't do it. And also too, like that's before where they have it in May, that's before Memorial Day, which if you're not from the United States listening to this, there's a holiday at the end of May called Memorial Day. And that's essentially the first like official weekend of summer. Like the summer season at like all coastal towns or anywhere, like the summer season is Memorial Day to Labor Day, which is the beginning of September. And so it's before Memorial Day, it's before the summer season, it's before Miami gets super crowded.
Yeah. And crucially, I believe that is after University of Miami's graduation.
Yes.
Which is also a big thing.
The
NFL team isn't in training camps yet. So that's another thing that you have to worry about too, with going to Miami and where the racetrack is, worrying about summer practice schedules for the Miami Dolphins down there and all of the teams that use that facility.
And then as you get closer to the school, Miami Hurricanes, the University of Miami Hurricanes also use that stadium.
Yes. So I don't think there's going to be any change of when that Miami race is. And
then they should get rid of it. In my opinion.
When Canada happens again, I have a feeling that being the second weekend in June is just a contract thing for them. They're paying a lot of money and a lot of contractual obligations to have it in a very specific weekend. But then we have our traditional European season that Azerbaijan now going back, I think going back to the end of the European season, like it used to be, instead of the beginning. It ends in Azerbaijan, and then you go Singapore, and then you go to the four races in the Americas. You have Austin, Mexico, Sao Paulo, Las Vegas, and then we go back to the Middle East for the final two races of the season, which is pretty similar to what we're going to be doing this year as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this year we also go to the whole end of the season. I'm pretty sure this year is like
Singapore, Austin, Mexico, Brazil, Las Vegas.
Qatar, Abu Dhabi. Yeah,
Qatar.
it's the
Yeah.
exact same.
And I think the biggest changes in there is the beginning of the season with moving those
Mhm.
Middle Eastern races outside of Ramadan.
Yeah, which that looks like pretty much the only.
Yeah, those are the only major changes because once
Yeah,
we go to Miami, we go to Imola, and then we go to Monaco, and then we go to Spain, and then we
mhm.
go to Canada,
Yeah, Canaan,
Austria, UK.
Canaan, Canada,
Um,
Canada
is that
and
what I said?
Spain. I
Is that
said
what
that.
oh, you said that?
I was about to say
UK.
Canaan, Canada.
Oh my God.
Oh God,
It's been that kind of day. And
it,
then we
it's been
Belgium,
that kind of week.
Hungary, Netherlands, Italy, Azerbaijan, and then the end of the season is pretty much the same. Um, so overall thoughts on the 2025 calendar. It's a great schedule. I like that it's more regionalized. I will
I
say
do
I
too.
still think that 24 races is too long of a season.
I totally agree with that. 24 races is too long. It is too long because like the thing to think about, when Formula One, when the Formula One season was like 18 races back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, when it was only 18 races, I feel like the races, because there were only 18, each race was more important.
Yes.
And it made for better racing. It made more exciting. And you didn't have as much. I mean, it still existed, especially like in the early in Ferrari and Michael Schumacher were dominating, but like you didn't have drivers winning the championship like 5 races before the end and just like completely running away with it. They had to get down to the last, couple races to decide who is going to win the championship. At least more so. There were still times like, in 2000 when, or 2002, I can't remember if it was 2000 or 2002 when Michael Schumacher won the race and won the championship in Japan, like 4 races before the end of the season. But it's just 18 races. It just made this each race matter a little bit more than having 24. And I said this before we started when we were talking about this and what we were going to discuss with this. I said this and I will stand by this probably for the rest of my life as a Formula One fan. And I don't want to sound like I remember Formula One back in the early two. Yeah, I don't want to be that Formula One fan, but I will only truly be happy with the Formula One schedule if they replace races like Miami, Vegas,
Qatar.
the Qatar, and what they're adding, Madrid. If they replace those races with Hockenheim, Nürburgring, Malaysia, what was the other one? Oh, in Turkey.
Yeah.
With those 4 tracks, I will truly never be happy as a Formula One fan until they include those 4 tracks again.
And I think that goes to something that we've talked about on the podcast before, is that Formula One is kind of shifting its philosophy in these races, and we see that in races in Miami and Las Vegas, and wanting to do this city track in Madrid, and wanting to go to other cities like Chicago and New York and places like that, is they're wanting to tap into cities and to markets, and they want to go to locations much more than they want to go to specific tracks. And I think, that's why, they wanted to go to Miami, and then they built this track in a parking lot that kind of sucks.
And honestly, like we saw that in the 80s a little bit. We saw that in the 80s a little bit with like them building the Vegas track in the parking lot of the freaking casino. Like, yeah, like I just think that's a great philosophy. Like or I wouldn't say great, but it's a fine philosophy to have of like tapping into cities and markets rather than going to specific tracks. But like, make the track a good track. Don't make it a crappy street circuit where we're just going to get like follow the leader racing like we get at Monaco.
Yeah.
And I hate Monaco.
And I said that when they started going to Miami and Las Vegas, and they were like, we're going to have 3 races in the US, and there are just so many better purpose-built tracks in the US that they could go to. Not any of them are FIA grade 1, but most of them
They're
would take
better.
they're better, and most of them would probably not take really that much at all to make them FIA grade 1. I mean, you have Road America, Laguna Seca,
I mean, shit, shoot,
S- Sonoma.
Formula One has already raced at Watkins Glen before,
Watkins Glen is another one.
and
Like,
there's several different layouts of Watkins Glen too.
yeah, I mean, you could do the NASCAR layout, or you could do the IndyCar layout, which has that little like dog leg section, which I believe is the section that F1 used to race at
Yeah.
back in the 70s, when they race at Watkins Glen. I mean, Sonoma. Yeah, they're just, I don't think they would ever go to Daytona, just because of the long high banking tracks. But
Yeah.
there are plenty of races that they could go to, and it wouldn't
Go
take
back to
much to go.
Indianapolis.
Yeah, Indianapolis. The Motor Speedway itself has new ownership. So because now it's owned by Roger Penske, and it's not owned by the same people that, with the crazy fiasco that happened in 2005. So I think that is a market that you could tap into again. And good. And same thing with Madrid. Do we really need another track in Spain? There's a perfectly good track in Barcelona that we're already using, that we're already racing on.
And shoot, if you want another street circuit, go to Valencia.
Yeah, there are already tracks already there that have been raced on. We don't need another one. And I think, and again, and it's just the shift in philosophy that F1 is going towards. They're tapping into locations and cities and markets more than they are interested in good quality races at good quality purpose-built racetracks.
And here's the other thing about, I was just thinking about this with Indianapolis. Indianapolis is, no matter where you come from in the United States, it's easy to get to. It's literally smack dab in the middle of the country. Like from where we live in Virginia, it's an hour and a half flight one way. Easy. Any of the airports in Virginia you can get to. It's a 3-hour flight from Florida. It's a 2.5-hour flight from Texas. It's a little bit longer from California and Washington, like the East Coast. It's a little bit longer, but like it's still very easy to get to.
Yeah.
Las Vegas is harder to get to if you live on the East Coast. Miami is just a mess to get to.
Well, my issue with Las Vegas is not necessarily the location. I think it's a great idea, and I think it's a good tourism town that I think it's cool that F1 is tapping into that market, but they're making, not only are they going to street circuits and they're going to cities and locations, but they're making it so exclusive for people that can, for only people that can afford to go. They're making it, essentially they're pricing local populations out of any of these races.
It's like Coachella. It's like the Coachella Music Festival. You want to get a
Right.
ticket to Coachella, it's $2,000.
Right, exactly. And it's completely pricing out the local population, and the local population is not happy that race is there. Same thing with Miami. The local Miami population does not like that race being there. The only people that like it are the people that show up for one weekend because they're celebrities and they get to go for free, and then they leave.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. That is the other thing. They make it so exclusive for these like only rich people to go, but all those rich and famous people, they end up going for free anyway.
Right.
Like all you see all of these like big social media influencers that go to this, they don't understand what Formula One is. They're just going because it's an influencing opportunity.
Right.
Be like, oh, look at the cool stuff. I went to Miami for the Formula One race. They don't know anything about Formula One.
Right.
Yet they're outsourcing that. They make it impossible for the Formula One fans who actually want to go to these races to go.
I remember. So,
I'm very passionate about this.
So we have a mutual friend of ours from school that lives down in Florida and has a couple friends, also former classmates of ours at JMU, that work and live in Miami. And I remember hearing that, a lot of the businesses, particularly like the Hard Rock Cafe and a lot of the businesses around the Hard Rock Stadium, get like free or very, very highly discounted, like VIP level tickets for sporting events that happen at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, whether it's the Miami Open tennis or, Miami Dolphins games or Miami Hurricanes. college football, like basically any major sporting event that happens at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, they get discounted tickets to, they get like blocks of tickets, each business, local business around, particularly the Hard Rock Cafe, which is the sponsor for the Hard Rock Stadium. But when F1 started going to Miami, they've completely blacklisted any businesses from being able to access cheap, like discount free or discounted tickets for anybody that works and businesses that either are connected to or sponsor parts of that sports complex. And that includes employees of the Hard Rock Cafe.
That's just so ridiculous to me.
And it's in line with like the same thing that they were doing in Vegas when they were putting up like opaque like guards around the track, around the city track, so you couldn't just like watch the race from wherever.
Yeah,
you
and
had
also
to have
like
a ticket to it.
The several like the sky bridges that go across the track from the different like parking garages and casinos, you know, around the strip, they put opaque so you couldn't see. It's like,
right,
what?
Yeah,
they're making it in a rich person's exclusive club. It's like, that's not what Formula One's like. That's not what it's about. It's not just like you hear stories of people in England who were going like as kids in the late 80s, early 90s, who were just like could go to the Formula One race at Silverstone for cheap. And it's kind of like the NASCAR races here. Like in you know, if NASCAR's in town in where we live in Richmond, it's like $30 to $50 for a ticket.
Yeah, super cheap
for the whole weekend.
So cheap.
And even IndyCar too. IndyCar was like a little bit more expensive because it was a little bit more exclusive of a ticket, but like still, like they were still cheap.
Well, even IMSA, the Rolex 24 at Daytona, a 4-day weekend pass at Daytona for this world-renowned race is $115.
I would pay $115.
And that includes garage access. So
I would pay $115 for that.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. You get
garage access. Are you kidding me?
So much access to like already half the Formula One grid because they're all freaking racing in it. But you get so many like access to so many international and superstar drivers, former F1 drivers, current F1 drivers, and even non F1 drivers like, you know, Scott Pruitt and Mike Rockenfeller, and, you know, IndyCar legends like Scott Dixon, that are, you know, Elio Castroneves, that all, Simon Pagenaud, that all still compete. So yeah, we could go on and we could do a whole podcast episode about it. But one thing that I think I've seen floated out around that Stefano Domenicali has kind of said that F1 is thinking about trying is starting in 2026, doing a sort of rotating European season. So that means each season to season, there are different tracks that sort of rotate in and out. So you have sort of a core group of tracks that you have on the season every year. And then, you know, some other, you know, racetracks, and he didn't mention any by name specifically, but, you know, so rotate in tracks that we don't go to anymore. So we do have access to go to tracks like Hockenheim and the Nürburgring and maybe even something like Malaysia. So I think that's something that has been floated around. And I think that would actually be a really good idea and a good way to get more tracks involved in F1 and tap into more markets without having you know, a 40 race schedule.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea. I like that idea. I don't know how those track promoters, I don't know if those individual track promoters and the tracks themselves would like that. I just don't know how much it would, especially if there are tracks that, you know, don't see a lot of action just throughout the year.
Yeah.
You know, I think like a lot of those tracks, they probably want a more permanent contract, be like, hey, like we want to host a Formula One race every year for X amount of time. But I think that's a really good, cool concept to kind of talk about and see what they can come up with.
It'll be interesting to see, and I think it'll be a little bit more challenging to kind of flesh all that out. But I think that is a really interesting idea. The only other thing before we wrap up is it was announced earlier last week that Formula One and Atlanta Braves owner Liberty Media has purchased the rights to MotoGP. So that's another racing series that is coming under the Liberty Media umbrella, and I think it has been met with a little bit of skepticism that they're going to kind of like Formula One-ify MotoGP. I don't necessarily know that that's the case because MotoGP is so different culturally from F1 and it's so very different. But I think it would be safe to say that there's probably going to be some sort of Netflix series and to go into in MotoGP. So it'll be interesting to see how MotoGP evolves from that. But I just think that that was another little interesting piece of news. So now the only things that Liberty Media own are MotoGP, Formula One, and the Atlanta Braves, which is so random.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll be really interested to see how or if MotoGP really changes because you're right, it's so vastly different, just
Right.
culturally and just operationally from Formula One.
And I will say, I think prior to Formula One's explosion of popularity in the States, with Drive to Survive, I think pre-Drive to Survive era, but particularly like in the early 2000s and 2010s when we were really first getting into Formula One, you asked anybody what the premier racing series in Europe was, and most people would say MotoGP in America.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
For a long time, it was the most popular non-American form of racing in the United States. And we still have a lot of friends of ours that, followed MotoGP much more than they follow Formula One. So it'll be interesting to see if it catches a little bit more mainstream, because now compared to Formula One, MotoGP looks a little bit more niche, but it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But I thought that was another interesting tidbit of news. So going forward next weekend, by this time next week, we will know who the winner of the Chinese Grand Prix will be. And before we get to there this week, we will preview everything that you need to know about the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix, the first Chinese Grand Prix in 5 years, which I think everybody's really excited for. I'm really excited for it. I don't know about you.
I'm so excited for it.
I'm stoked.
Not looking forward to watching this Formula One race at 2 a.m, but still excited for it.
Still excited. It's going to be great. We'll get our sleep schedules adjusted. I'm going to be up anyway at that a lot of those hours because I'm because of my musical commitments. But yeah, it'll be really exciting, and we will come back with everything you need to know from the world of Formula One and the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix.